Hi. You all know me, but my name is Man. Not all. Hi, welcome. And I'm an artist from New York. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about my practice in general and kind of how I got to be sitting in this chair right here and what has led me here, and just give a little bit of a backstory about that. And yeah, there's some slides. It's not really too planned. I'm going to try to wing it a little bit, and we're just going to see how this goes. So yeah, based in New York for the past couple of years, but originally from Philadelphia. And I come from an artistic family. My dad is a figurative painter, so I grew up with art very much in the house. And on Sundays, we went to the art museum and would look at art all the time. And it was a very particular version of art, very traditional, very figurative, large-scale paintings was sort of my first introduction to what art was and what the art world was. I also have a background in acting, so I have a degree from Emerson College in Boston, where I went for 4 years. And from the time that I was, I think, 4 or 5, I wanted to be an actor, so I studied that, acting, directing, and playwriting. And then when I was in my early 20s, when I graduated, I moved to Chicago to pursue a career in theater, but then very quickly transitioned away from that into kind of web technologies, as well as beginning a kind of journey into visual art and contemporary art, like the sort of highbrow art in a quote. And I worked my way there through a series of steps, which really started with these drawings, and I call them circle drawings because they're drawings of tiny circles. But when I started them, I was thinking a lot about how you can reduce a gesture. So you think about what interests people in a painting, what calls you to like a work of art, and sometimes you can't always figure out what that is. It could be the subject, but it could also be the way in which it's done. So at that time, I was really interested in how you could transmit meaning through just a shape, through a gesture. And what's the simplest form that's a closed form is a circle. So I started there, and then I extrapolated and built those out, and ultimately what you'll see as we start to zoom in, and hopefully you can see that, it's kind of small, but these drawings consist of thousands and thousands and thousands of tiny circles. And so this piece is actually about this wide as that tall, so it's like 30 inches by 30 inches. So I've been doing these for a couple of years, really since 2006. And they take an incredibly long amount of time. This one I think was 2 years to make, and they take anywhere from a couple months to that amount of time. And so it's as much about the process of making them as it is about what happens once they're sort of finished. And it was also something that I was looking for a certain kind of stability in my life when I started these, and I realized that I could do these drawings for the rest of my life. You could just focus on one shape and spend a lifetime doing them. So we'll see if I continue making them throughout the rest of my life, but it's something that I think about that I can always go back to. It's this very simple form. So I also make these collages, which I've made for a handful of years. These are actually 2 separate collages. You can't really see it here. They're very small. They're 5 by 7. And they all come from the same magazine, which is Holiday Magazine, which is this American travel publication that was popular in post-World War II America and focused a lot on the kind of emergent middle-class lifestyle. And so I was really interested in that idea of what vision of America were sold and how we kind of interpret this idea of consuming things. So in that particular era, there was a lot of emphasis based on travel as well as technology, sort of like radios and reel-to-reel tapes and video recorders and 16-millimeter cameras. And so the idea was to kind of mash up this, to make kind of a different type of form using our projections of what it is that we want and sticking these heads onto these other characters. And so I started making these relatively more recently as in 2006. And they were also a way that, so the drawings take months and months, sometimes years. And these collages I can do relatively quickly. I can spend time just looking through the magazine. But the actual process of cutting them out, they're all hand cut, super meticulous. And that process is very different from what it takes to actually make a drawing. And so in all of the things that I'm kind of looking at, I'm approaching it, I get like a little bug in my head that I follow some sort of strand. So whether it's like what is the simplest form of an expression of a gesture in a circle, or whether it's how can you distill kind of American consumerism and what it means to have desires, and how can you translate that into something that's fun and quirky and like silly while still has some kind of undercurrent of meaning. And that sort of also leads into these performances that I've done over the past handful of years. And so as I mentioned before, I spent a lot of time on the internet thinking about digital technology and social media in particular, and just how we communicate ideas and our feelings and thoughts online to people, to strangers, to people that we know, and trying to understand how those relationships, in fact, are actual lives. And do I relate to someone differently in person as a result of how I might communicate with them online? And so these I put performance in quotes because it's not like traditional theater performance, but it has elements of that, and it draws upon my background in the theater to kind of extrapolate information. So to give you a kind of real-world example, I did this performance called 24-Hour Best on Buy, where I spent 24 hours in a Best Buy shopping, but not actually buying anything. And the whole time that I was there, I was just communicating with people on Twitter about what I wasn't going to buy. And at the time, they were then telling me what not to buy. And I was sort of relating this experience of what it's like to walk through that type of a store over 24 hours and just kind of describe, relating that experience in a way that anyone could sort of approach it. So what ended up happening was, when I first started the project, there was like kind of no one following, but it built over the course of that 24 hours that by the end, there were hundreds and hundreds of people tweeting and hashtagging and mentioning me, and sort of culminated in this like very kind of massive viral experience for the time. And this was back in 2010, when online there weren't really people using the internet, and particularly with social media, in a kind of serious art perspective. So I was always thinking about how do you put this in the context of the art world? And that's something that I think a lot about, of bringing things that aren't necessarily art into the more like traditional, whether it's prints on a wall or whatever. And so kind of expanding that idea of what art can be. So I did a lot of these different types of performances. Another one was called 24-Hour Kith. And so this one was, I was invited by an art blog to sort of be a resident in their office space, and then also contribute something to a gallery exhibition. And so I had these mannequins that I just found, and I decided to put feathers on them based off of what people were saying. So I'll sort of show you what that looked like a little bit. And this is the very beginning. This is like, it might have even been before I actually started. And so people were tweeting in all different types of things, and after, this is what it looked like after 20 hours. So what you see is each individual feather represents a single tweet that was sent from the audience while I was live streaming this in real time. And they were all different types of things, like things that people were saying, like I am consumed, I am the tingle of clean flesh, I am kin and kith, I am master of my own movements, etc., etc. So it was a whole bunch of these statements from people. And you could also follow along online on a web page that I had set up for it. And so I think that like, as these sort of performances evolved, I was really constantly thinking about what compels us to share something. So what is it that like, in the simplest form of like the artist feeling like they have something that they need to say, So what drives us to create something? What drives us to want to put something new out into the world? And for me, a lot of that is trying sometimes like, recklessly to create these kinds of connections with people, and understanding how other people are experiencing the world around them. And I feel like if I can do that, if I sort of can sense what as many people around me, what they think of something, then I have an opportunity to kind of bring all that in and then make something out of it. And in this case, it was a sort of talisman of a large figure with feathers on it. And I don't have a photo of it, but it was the other kind of half of this piece was another mannequin that was set up in a gallery where it asked you to put your thumbprint onto the mannequin. And so that, in that case, it was this very personal relationship to identity that you have, and turning over your own individual self, and by putting your thumbprint onto a mannequin. And so, and in thinking about that, being sort of in two places at once, right? So on the one hand, I was in this anonymous office building completely alone, but you had all these people that were following along wherever they were in the world, kind of just participating in this or just seeing it go by. And a lot of what's happened over the past really only like 10 years, that so many people, not everyone, but a lot of people, we live so much of our time online. And whether that's like checking our email or responding to email or just like this all the time, or at our computers, that it's changing the way that we think about relationships and on like a very fundamental, simplistic level. And so what I'm trying to do is like just be in the moment of that time and understand how those changes can affect artistic practice and art making. How are we doing? Good? Good? Any questions so far? I realize that I'm like flying through my presentation, so we're good? Okay, I'm gonna keep going. So, yeah, and these performances that I've been talking about, I think were all 2010 and 2011. And so I like exhausted, and another one I didn't include in these slides, but I think it's relevant for what I'm kind of trying to get at here is in how we communicate. There's this piece that I did that was a commission for an organization in New York called Creative Time, where they asked me to do a performance that used Twitter. So I did it in Port Authority, which in New York is the big bus terminal where it's an insane place. It's like the scary place that you don't ever really want to spend any time in. And so I decided to do a 24-hour performance there, where I went up to people and asked them where they were going. And so they would be in these lines to go on these buses, mostly regional in New York, and ask them where they were going. And then I asked people online where they had been. And so what I was doing is I was relating those stories of people that were in person to people that were online and trying to understand further, welcome, how you can relate a story that might be happening online about these sort of people talking with each other about places that they had been, and how you can relate that to these people that were there in person at Port Authority and where they were going. And it ended up actually, I was not expecting after 24 hours in this Port Authority bus terminal to I had a hard time leaving. I fell in love with the space, I fell in love with the people, and I saw a side of humanity that I never would have anticipated seeing in such a outwardly scary place. So this is a piece that I did in 2011. So I became increasingly interested in the kind of the things that you don't talk about. And so after I was doing these 24-hour performances, it was, I got some press, I got some people, there was some momentum behind it. And I started meeting different people in the art world and seeing how different people were in the art world, and started kind of beginning to question my role in relationship to it, and kind of what it takes to make it, in quotes, what it takes to be an artist, what it takes to earn a living, and just looking at the people around me and how they were doing that. And at this same time, the Occupy Wall Street movement was happening in New York City. And so I had been doing a project in London, and I came back right when it was picking up steam, and I went down to Zuccotti Park, and I was immediately overwhelmed with that experience. And at the time, it was so inspiring, and it was raw, and it was you could see how people were affected by these financial decisions that had been made, and how many people were affected by it, and how much of the population was willing to sort of show up there and be a part of something without really knowing the direction that it had. And so for a couple weeks, I was there every day. I spent the night there, just sort of embedded in the experience of what it meant to try to create some kind of actual change. And ultimately, I walked away from that thinking that, for me, protesting, with the fists raised, walking down the street, wearing the right things, looking the right way, and kind of screaming the right chants and all that wasn't affecting the kind of change in myself that I knew that I needed. And that at the same time, I was needing to hold myself accountable the same way that I was expecting the banks to be accountable for their actions that led to the financial crisis in the first place. So So all of which is sort of a backstory to say that I started this project called Occupy Man, where for a year I publicly tracked all of my finances. So anytime I spent money or made money, I tweeted about it. Had an account that, and this is a screenshot of the Twitter page. And then I also had a publicly accessible Google document where anyone could see what I was making and what I was spending. And it was a very scary experience, but it was also very liberating in some sense. And, ironically, I started the year with $70 to my name, something like $70, and ended the year with just about the same amount of money. But throughout that time, I had people coming up to me privately saying, thank you for doing this. Thank you for exposing some of this stuff in the art world that we're not really allowed, that if I were to expose, I'd be blacklisted. And I actually had an artist tell me that, I love what you're doing, but I've heard that you are blacklisted from galleries as a result of this project. They will not work with you. And to me, it was scary on the one hand because, okay, did I just kill my career? But also if they're that intimidated and that scared or that, whatever, then I'm doing something right. And I hope to always, as an artist, hold myself to that standard, to really follow these kinds of strands as I see them coming up, as whether it's inequity financially or just with sort of the consumerism side, however that kind of manifests in contemporary society and culture. I want to hold myself to that level to try to be accountable as an artist. Because in a very kind of grand sense, that's, to me, the best work comes out of that. When artists are actually responding to what's happening and making it sort of personal but also universal in a way that's very just honest. Document ended up being acquired by a collector in New York, and so the acquisition was then also put as a line item in the document. And it says, courtesy of David Carson, who is the collector. And so after that year, it kind of put a cap on the types of performances that I had been doing up until that point, and shifting into these more harder to kind of classify. And over the past couple years, that's been sort of a theme. I'm following these strands as they kind of come out and as I'm responding to what's going on, and it looks less and less like traditional art in some way. And so one example of that is this kind of event called You Light Me. And what I did was, for 2 weeks in my bedroom, I set up a light that was connected to the internet, where anytime someone mentioned me on Twitter, the light went on and off. And so no matter the time of day, whatever time of day it was, the light was going on and off. And it was a way to kind of physically connect me to these virtual connections that had become so kind of overwhelming and yet ubiquitous at that point, and by actually activating a light. And at the same time, kind of keeping me aware of this idea of what does it mean if you get a like on Instagram, or a like, or someone favorites your tweet on Twitter, or someone likes your Facebook post. And we get kind of conditioned in a certain way to look for that affirmation. So I was trying to find a way to make it not an affirmation, but an assault. and then to live with that assault over time to see if I could kind of come out through the other side. And I was also keeping a counter so that every time it happened, I could keep kind of a visual reminder as well of what that number is. And I mentioned this project as well because in the hallway out there at the top of the stairs, there's a light bulb which is connected to the internet as well. And so anytime someone tweets with the hashtag Hulu, or if they post an Instagram photo with the hashtag Hulu, the light goes on and off. And so for me, while I'm here, it's a way to kind of keep me connected so I can see when I'm working at the desk. I see the sort of light. I kind of know that some people are talking about the larger project that I'm a part of here, and it grounds me in that way as well. And so I'll just, that's what it looks like. So yeah, the quote was, "This light will turn on as a result of this post." I will give the warning that if you post on Twitter, sometimes there's a really long delay, so be patient. Instagram tends to work a little bit faster, so the mysteries of the internet, are mysteries. So I think that and there's another piece that I don't have a photo of here, which after I'm done, you can sort of check out. You might have seen it on your way in, and it's the red and yellow blinking lights out there. And this is another piece that initially started actually right when I got here. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm doing in a second, so just bear with me. But I was thinking about how you visualize data in its like sort of simplest form, right? And so the project that I'm working on in some sense is about diabetes and the diabetes epidemic in the United States. And so one of the first things in my initial research that jumped out at me were the numbers that I have up there, which are that there are, in 2012, there are 29.1 million people with diabetes, type 1 and type 2, and 86 million people with prediabetes. And so in trying to wrap my head around those numbers, I made the little red and yellow blinking lights, where if that piece were on for an entire year, the red light would blink 29.1 million times, and the yellow light would blink 86 million times, representing each individual person that has either diabetes or prediabetes. And so I keep it on my desk while I'm working as this kind of constant reminder that it goes off so frequently. I mean, that's almost 3 yellow blinks per second and 1 per second of the red blinking. And to try to kind of ground this abstract sense of the data and the information that's around us in a visual way that I can relate to. So, yeah, trying to think if there's any other like kind of related projects that I want to hit on before I jump into the kind of what I'm doing here. I can't think of any. Any questions so far? Happy to like open up now. No, we're good. Okay, so Thrive 365, actually I should introduce this a little bit more. I kind of like threw these slides together and am also winging it as I go. So I am here as a result of this amazing grant that was given to Ideas and from the NEA to work as a sort of artist in corporate residence, to put it one way. And essentially what that means is, and the grant was given to work with artists in different sectors of the local economy here in Louisville. And what I've been paired with was this platform called Thrive 365. And what it does is it essentially there is a proprietary formula which adds up a food score. So for people with diabetes, it can give you a sense of how you're doing in a given day. And so I was brought here to look at this platform and to kind of understand how it might relate to the general public or how it could relate differently, and to kind of come up with ways of thinking about it from an artist standpoint, from not necessarily an analytics person or a scientist or even someone in the health world, but how like an artist who thinks about the world as an artist sometimes does, how it might approach thinking about how this platform can reach the most number of people. And for me, what's really important is how we relate to each other. And this goes back to like the performances where I was trying to like communicate between people anonymously both and people in person, right? So if you're trying to track your health, right? How do we approach that? What is hard about that? What is easy? What are the things that make us not want to do it? And like, so I looked at my own personal life, and I am very blessed with a high metabolism, but I also I eat very poorly sometimes. I eat conveniently. I eat, all these ways that a lot of people I think can identify with. And so I'm trying to use that as a starting point and extrapolate that information into how the general public approaches something. And so actually what you're seeing, we'll hold off on what we're seeing in a second, because part of that way of approaching how we relate to our bodies and the food that we put into our bodies, and particularly with this question of how it relates to diabetes, I developed this online survey. And the survey is very much a way to approach this from someone who spends a lot of time on the internet and thinking of the kind of culture of the internet, as well as a very broad audience of people that spend a lot of time online. And so the questions are sort of fun, they're different, they're a little off-kilter. They're trying to kind of shake what it normally means to take a survey about something and make it a little bit, more dynamic. So there's tons of animated GIFs. It's a whole different approach to this. And so in doing that, I've realized that, in some sense, it's an evolving process, right? And so I think a lot about, how people respond, how you engage online. And then what I'll be doing over the next week is using this space back here as a sort of intake and sort of a research clinic to talk to people about their health in general. People with diabetes, anyone who just wants to talk about their health in general. And using this sort of space to kind of visualize some of the stuff that's been going in my brain, and thinking about how do we put these numbers into practice, and how do we, because part of what started happening for me, almost immediately, I got overwhelmed by the complexity of the issue and by how much information is out there and how stacked against you the cards are. And so part of that is looking at the political influence, and where these different factors are coming into how we might approach this from a different perspective. And so it's funny because we were initially going to be doing this talk downstairs, and I forgot to change out the slides. So you've probably already seen the next 3 slides because we're actually sitting in this room right now. So just thinking about how we can approach a very, and again, I go back to 86 million people and 29.1 million people just in this country alone. And how we can have some understanding of, because ultimately, yes, there's an important part where you have to figure out the very simple things. How do you manage your diet? But for me, there's a larger picture of how does humanity exist in this particular incarnation? How are we as a society evolving? What choices are we making? And what can encourage us to make different choices about our lives? And it's very idealistic, it's very naive. I recognize that in my own being as an artist, that I want to be a better person in this world. I want to be someone who holds myself to the standard that I hold other people to. But that there's a process by which we can go through that. And the first part of that is just actually looking at what's around us and trying to have an understanding of how we might be able to act differently. So while I've been doing this project, I've been so much more aware of my diet and what I put into my body as a result. And so ultimately, the only thing that can actually change is my sort of first initial approach to that. And so the other thing to just sort of talk about, which I don't think I mentioned, is in the first room that you walked in to get through, are all of these images of sugar. And so sugar kind of offered this entry point into my thinking about just how difficult it is to overcome something as challenging as the diabetes epidemic in this country. And and so the documents behind me here are related to different tactics that have been used to suppress information that would reduce the recommended intake of our sugar in our diet. So we have these people in our government that are strong-arming scientists to present information in a different way. And it's just one tiny piece of the picture, but for me it's something that I can kind of hold on to. And so in thinking about that, I took these images of sugar that I found online, and I zoomed into different sugar cubes, and I took them into Photoshop and deleted certain areas and blew them up, and then layered them on top of each other and kind of printed them out really big. So you're decontextualize them from their normal kind of, you might get a sense that it's grainy, it's something, but you can't really place it. And to me, it's also sort of working through that process of how do you visualize something. And in addition to making something that's a little bit more abstract, like this room back here, it's kind of information, and it's me kind of thinking about all of this to understand where it can go and how it can kind of exist in some form. And that is one way in which it exists. And the survey is another way. So to me, the survey is its own sort of work of art. And I had another thought in there, but I think, let's see what my next, oh, okay, so that says, okay, thank you. And thank you to the people that I said, to Ideas and to Zephyr Gallery for putting this on, as well as to Thrive and the city. And I just I want to talk about this for a minute, and then I'd love to open up to questions or just sort of general comments. It's been really awesome to come here and to see what the city is doing and to be shown the city in the way that I've been shown to it. And I mean, as an outsider, this is a very, very special place, and it is awesome to see what's happening here. So it's really cool. And I'm just like grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to like be a small part of that in this particular way. And also like one of the charts that you'll see in this room is about diabetes in Louisville. And it has those numbers, and it's something that is very local. It affects a lot of people in this city. And so I know coming in as an outsider, I have a different perspective, but I've been very appreciative of how welcomed I've felt here. So yeah, I just want to put an extra thank you into the city for having me here. So I know I went way faster than I was thinking I was going to go, but I think those are all the main points I have, and thank you so much for having me. Yeah, thanks. Great question.
React to it as an artist.
Yeah, so I was specifically there. It gets it's a lot of language to sort of piece it all together. But basically, I was brought here through Theo, who runs Ideas, and Ideas is partnered with Residency Unlimited, which is an organization in Brooklyn, in New York, that I've worked with as well, which is how I know Theo. And so that I was invited here through that sort of connection to work with Ideas. And specifically, there is a consulting agreement with what that actually looks like. So there are deliverables, there's interviews that I have to do. So there's a kind of a concrete consultation part that exists within this relationship. And I think the corollary is the kind of artistic stuff that comes out of that as well. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it does. I think they both work with each other. So obviously there's a bottom line that you have to think about and look at, increasing sort of enrollments and numbers and trying to sort of get exposure for the platform. But there's also this way of approaching creatively. We'll do that naturally. We'll find a way to kind of approach it in a way that might not be approachable in another direction. And I'm also approaching it so right now I'm in like total art mode, so it's a little bit harder for me to switch, but I keep those on parallel tracks as well. So I'm sort of constantly thinking about the like data analytic driven side and the side that's more the traditional consulting, while I'm also thinking about what it means to be an artist making art out of this and where they sort of intersect and where they kind of weave in together and where they go apart. And so it's definitely a steady dialogue that happens in my process of thinking about approaching it. Because I've done consulting work as well for social media companies, so like that part of my practice exists in its own sort of bucket. So, yeah. Last week, the Leo Weekly invited me to take over their Twitter feed for a day, which was fun. I got to get my hands dirty with their 14,000 followers and kind of, as a little mad scientist. And I approached it in trying to talk to people about diabetes and knowing that it would be a predominantly Louisville audience, how to get them sort of talking about their condition or just getting a sense of who's out there talking about what. And I was really surprised to see how heartfelt people were willing to be publicly, especially on Twitter, about how their condition affected their lives. And so I had people saying, my daughter has a very hard time because people make fun of her. They don't understand what it is. And so a lot of like how I'm approaching it is, especially as an artist, is how do people understand diabetes in popular culture? And the thing that I keep hearing time and time and again is that it's not just a fat disease. It's not just a problem of people who have poor diet. It's a lot of different things lead to the different types of diabetes that you can have. And that's something that seemingly the general public doesn't seem to know. And quite frankly, myself coming into this, I in the back of my head, I knew there was like type 1 and type 2, but I didn't really understand the difference between the two. And like I'm still sort of working to like understand the general public and how they approach this and how I can communicate to them as well. And so yeah, there were other people that were just sharing very personal stories about their lives and what it's like living with it. And a lot of them had to do with this like being frustrated that people don't understand them and that they're misunderstood. And that's something that, as the research continues, figuring out how to kind of shift the dialogue or make it about something that's a little bit bigger and make it approachable in a way that like the general public can hear it without it being, because the risk that you run is, it's another guy with a cause, like, he's just on his like, and you just tune out immediately because there's so much information. It's very easy to kind of, to just tune out all this stuff. So part of what I'm trying to do is understand how to reach an audience without them tuning out. And what is the entry point to that? Because then you're talking, I mean, and ultimately my hope and belief is that it's not just people with diabetes. You're talking about every single human being on this planet. So not that I'm trying to make the project that big, but just understanding the human nature of it is something that I'm getting at. And when you have individual people replying on Twitter, you get to like actually speak with them individually and understand their pain. And I think if we can understand each other's pain, then we have a chance to actually do something and turn it into something that's positive, or at least shift that a little bit. So, yeah, I think a lot of people are. I mean, mostly it's it's hard to eat well, and it's hard. Like I struggle with if I overeat or if I eat the wrong thing, and so those sorts of things where people are very self-aware and self-conscious of when they're eating when they shouldn't be. And so I think there's a lot of self-awareness that goes into that. And so there's self-consciousness as well, and how you kind of deal with the emotions related to that. And another thing that's come out of this that's sort of related is the depression that affects people as a result of having this condition. That, from what I'm hearing, that doctors are saying that the patients won't take the medication. And so, if you're that depressed, you have to figure out how to shift someone's livelihood into wanting to be better for themselves. So that's something that in the back of my head. And again, it's not any different than what I have to do for my own life. I mean, I might not have diabetes, but I definitely I struggle. I want to live a better life. I want to be a better person and self-improvement. And so I approach it the same way. I've been thinking about that a lot as well, and I was telling you right before we started about this documentary called Fed Up, which if you're at all interested in anything of this conversation about diabetes and health in America, you should watch it. It's super informative and not that depressing either, which is great. But one of the things that they're talking about, the difficulty of getting better food into the school system. And so if you have better lunches, then you at least are giving options that are kind of framed in a different way, and taking away options that really should not be existing, and not calling pizza a vegetable, and really shifting the way that we think about that. So I'm not quite at the point where I'm optimistic about the ability to put the pressure on the school system and the corporations that are actually controlling what goes in, because the truth is the school system doesn't have the money to afford the better food. These corporations, they give subsidies and details to the schools, so then they're getting discounted, so then they're able to get this food for cheaper, which is why it's there. So in my head, I think of it as there has to become a tipping point where the general public is either sick enough physically or mentally to put pressure on the politicians to change the actual policy in this country, and to force the hand of how we make policy regarding what we eat and what's okay and what's not. And yet, as soon as that starts to happen, the corporations will flare up instantly. I mean, in 2009, on that chart over there, you can see it. There was the discussion for the possibility of a tax on sugar in soda. And the lobbies, they flared up like crazy, and they supported the politicians, and the bill never even made it to the House. So that's sort of what we're up against. But the truth is, if by 2050 we're in the same direction, same trajectory, you're talking about 1 in 3 people with diabetes. So at a certain point, the pressure will be put on the politicians. So for me, that's where I think it happens. Oh, they are wrong. Oh, shoot. That is crazy. That was wrong then from what I find. So yeah, 1 in 2. That is... Thank you for correcting me. Add a whoa to that. So yeah. My hope, though, and again, if anything that this project is teaching me, that in the past when I've thought about, because I've also thought about this, similarly when I think about large projects, right? You think about whether it's how we're being spied on, global warming. There are a lot of really big issues facing the world right now. And the tendency that I have is as soon as I start thinking about them and reading about them, I'm overwhelmed and I can't deal and I just put it away because it's just too much. It's too much information. But for me to just kind of focus just on this one particular issue and this kind of lens into it, it's kind of teaching me that at the very least, if you get the information out there in some capacity, then I am now informed, and then I can make slightly more informed choices. And the hope is that if other people can approach it the same way, then very slowly you shift the consciousness a little bit. And that's all you can hope to do. I mean, ultimately, I can only change myself. I can only change my habits, how I relate to, and it was no different than when I was tracking my finances. Like, I felt so inadequate by being able to change the art world or change the banking system, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to say, you guys, we were swindled out of trillions of dollars, and these executives are making so much money, and I can barely afford to buy groceries. And so the only thing that I could do is respond personally. And so I think where this is heading for me is that type of a response. So I've approached that when I first started the performances, going all the way back to Best Buy, it was initiated because I felt personally strongly about this issue, consumerism. And so I trusted that I didn't care if anyone followed. I had to do it. It felt like I had to talk about this. I had to make something of it so that I wasn't crippled under the weight of the issue. So what I found is that if I'm in a good place or in a place where I'm approaching it honestly, then I have an insight that is both very personal, but it's also universal. And people can access that. People can sort of sense that, well, this guy's into this weird issue, or this guy's into this for some reason, and it attracts people to it. And maybe that goes all the way back to actually drawing circles, where people can look at it and be like, whoa, something is happening here, but it's just circles. And for me, it's a similar thing. It's like there's something in here that I'm trying to explain, and I don't care. I mean, ultimately, yes, it'd be great if we deal with this, but for me, I'm trying to understand it, and I'm trying to make sense of it. And occasionally that has the ability to transcend and to become a kind of universal thing that other people can relate to in some capacity. But I try not to go into it with the thought of how can I reach the most people, more like what is the most important thing for me to communicate. So, and then sometimes they fail gloriously and no one pays attention at all. And then other times it's an instant people are paying attention. And then this other kind of category that's happened recently were things that I did a couple of years ago, which were no one noticed at all. There's a certain point it kind of comes back around, and people are like, oh, this was happening then, and something was going on here. And so I've learned to kind of trust that I just put it out there in as honest of a way as possible, and if the timing is right, and if I'm being sort of true to the intentions that I have about it, then people will notice. Yeah, that's a really, really great question. Probably. Yeah, I would say that the more successful sort of events or projects or performances have been when I've been truly fearless, and not when I'm kind of second guessing myself. And I do that a lot. And over the past couple of years, I have done that a lot. So I think that there is a correlation there. But the truth is, I don't want to sound like I don't know how this is going to come off, but it's hard. It's hard to put sort of yourself out there in a big way, in a vulnerable way. It's hard to be very vulnerable and not have it be sort of oh, look at me, but to be vulnerable in an artistic way. And so that is something that I work towards, being able to be vulnerable, but while still sort of trusting the intent of what I'm doing. So, but yeah, I've definitely found that when if I'm holding back, that everything suffers. It isn't received the same way. And then on top of that, sort of as a parallel track, it's also totally randomly. Sometimes, for whatever reason, some things just take off, and other times, just for seemingly unknown reasons, they don't. So I've learned to try not to control it. Cool.
Does that mean that you don't have a goal in terms of this project of making an impact on diabetes? I'm still trying to...
Yeah, so there are very clear goals in I have to reach X number of people, the platform has to be seen by X number of people. So there are kind of logistical things that have to happen. But for me, separately from those sort of that are outlined in the contract, there's a much more open-ended kind of, and that's where for me I don't want to say more artistic, but a different approach kind of takes precedence. So I look at this from an artistic kind of human side of like, I'm looking at information, I'm processing what I'm seeing, and what is the most natural form, creative form for this to take place. And it might look like something totally different. It might be a book, it might be a website. So I try not to put too much of a goal on terms of that. But on the other hand, there are very clear goals of what needs to be accomplished from the consulting side.
Really
So.
interesting negotiation.
Yeah. I split my days, you know. Yeah, what's kind of amazing that part of what's come out of this, the gallery here, Zephyr is interested in the possibility of kind of in a larger scale representing the red and yellow blinking lights on the actual exterior of the building and doing that as a full year-long project. And not like really telling anyone, but just having it out there that people could see if they pass by. And if you know to ask, then you know to ask, but it's not sort of in your face. So that's like an immediate, possibility for it becoming kind of visually represented in a outside of the gallery, the internal gallery, and in the actual physical public. And that is something that could evolve over time. And for me personally, I'd be interested in seeing how that develops into more real-time data or data that's specific to Louisville and kind of, again, making it about the individual experience here, but in a way that's sort of once removed. So, yeah. So hopefully, we'll see, yeah. Yes? Yeah. I have a very supportive wife. Thank you. It's different for every project. I mean, it really is. I think that there's always an incredibly difficult time where I'm like lost in it. I think it's a failure. I don't know what I'm doing. I think it's all going to fail. And it's awful. And I don't know why I'm doing it. But I've learned that like I just trust through that process, that like I keep following the strands. I keep following the thoughts that come up. I keep following the like things that are nagging at me, and I leave things out. I kind of change them. I move them around, and that allows me. It gives me the space at least to know what strands I should follow. And like I've developed my practice around that, so I know that it's constantly evolving. I mean, back here is sort of like the board will look different tomorrow. These might swap out. It could be something else, and so sometimes success looks like bodies. It looks like number of people that have retweeted something. Or number of people that went to my website, or other times it just is literally like, I feel like even if no one looked at something, I'm proud of the work that I was doing. And that's usually harder to find, but that happens as well. And so I've tried very hard over the years to not define success by money, number of people, or the sort of external things. So,
What makes this art?
Because I say it's art. That's the easiest answer. I know it's kind of the flip answer, but I've thought about that a lot over the years. And there is a certain point where it strays further and further from, it's in a gallery. So anytime something is put on a wall in a gallery, it is a traditional gallery. You're going to look at it as art. At the same time, to me, it's more about the process of how we think about something. So I'm contextualizing it as an artistic process. So to me, that makes it art. Yeah. Does that satisfy? Yeah. But no, it's a valid question. And it is a lot easier to see how the front room, like, yes, they're abstract images. It might be easier to quantify that as art. And what's happening back here is like a little bit like it's different. It looks like something else. It's a process. But to me, it's all, I don't know. I've said this before, and at the risk of sounding super cheesy, I approach my life as an artistic practice. I approach what I look at to be art. I think about the world around me as art. I try to, at least. And I think about how I can relate to it differently. So for me, a lot of what I'm seeing is art. And it just kind of becomes the framework that I put around it and how I talk about it that puts it into the public as more art. But to me, but really, when I even say art, I just mean like that's just experience. It's just creative living. It's just like trying to make sense of the world around us in a way that maybe isn't the way that quote-unquote normal people might. And it also allows me to kind of exist in this world without being too overwhelmed, by existence. So. I think we're almost out of time. Any other questions? Last burning desires? Well, thank you guys so much. It's really awesome. I really appreciate it. So, thanks.